Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Earwax. I'm Colin, and today we're going to be doing my top 5 albums from 1983. Alrighty, so before we get into this, if you guys could please like and subscribe if you haven't already, I would greatly appreciate it. It really helps me out. Also, just to go over the ground rules for this series one more time, there are no live albums, no EPs, no reissues. These all have to be studio albums that were released in 1983. Also, just keep in mind, this is just my personal list. These are my favorite albums. These are not what I think are objectively the best albums of the year. Just again, my personal top 5 list. So if my last video of the best top 5 albums of 1993 was the easiest one I had done up until this point, this one was probably the hardest. The 80s are one of my all-time favorite decades for music. The birth, well, not birth, but like the defining years of synth pop and post punk and new wave, which are some of my favorite genres of all time. And 83 in particular was a banger year. There were so many good albums released this year. I am still just going to keep it to 3 honorable mentions and then my top 5. But yeah, I could probably do a top 100 list for this year and not run out of great albums. So, first off, for the honorable mentions is going to be Kill 'Em All by Metallica. This is still my favorite Metallica album to this day. I do think, again, objectively, Ride the Lightning is a better album, but I love just like the raw energy that they bring on Kill 'Em All, and I still think one of the best metal albums ever written. After that is going to be Rebel Yell by Billy Idol. This is such a good album. It's such a great combination of like new wave and like arena stadium rock, and the swagger and energy that Billy brings on this album is just absolutely unmatched. Rebel Yell is still, I think, one of like the greatest songs ever written. And then last but certainly not least is going to be Color by Numbers by Culture Club. I love this album so much. It's I think, really underrated album when it comes to like 80s pop music, and it doesn't get nearly as much love as it should. So, with the honorable mentions out of the way, let's talk about the top 5. Number 5 is going to be Soul Mining by The. So this is an album that I've been listening to a lot recently. I did a review of the most recent The album, Ensoulment, back in September. Link for that is right here. This is the album that like started it for me. So the classic The hits like Uncertain Smile and This Is the Day, but the album front to back, it's just such a shining example of like really, really good synth pop and new wave and like a little bit of post punk. And it's just a perfect example of why I love 80s music so much. And it's so underrated. Not enough people are listening to this album. I have gone back, and especially since doing my review of Ensoulment, and I've listened to a lot more of The's discography, but this is still my favorite album. And number 4 is going to be the debut album and self-titled album by Violent Femmes. Violent Femmes is such a unique band. I don't know if they're like the originators, but they're definitely the most popular like folk punk band of all time, using that like angry punk energy with like mostly acoustic instruments. Now, they didn't exclusively use acoustic instruments, but that was kind of what they became known for. I actually got to see them last year at Darker Waves in Huntington Beach, and they played this album front to back, and it was awesome. They still sound great. They're such a cool live band. If you get a chance to go see them live, definitely do it. But this album in particular is so good. I mean, obviously you've got like the biggest hit of their entire career, which is Blister in the Sun. You've got Gone Daddy Gone. You've got Kiss Off, Add It Up. Like, just front to back, this album is incredible. And if you like punk music, if you like, any sort of like high energy, like kind of folksy stuff, this album is for you. I think everyone should listen to it at least once in their life, and definitely deserving a spot on my top 5. Number 3 is going to be War by U2. So U2 is a very special band for me. It's my father's favorite band, so I grew up listening to a lot of U2. And I'll be honest, there's some U2 that I was listening to as a kid that I really enjoyed, and then some that like it took me until becoming an adult and being a little bit more intelligent with my music understanding to really appreciate. And War is a pretty unique album in that like there were songs that I loved as a kid, and then as I grew up and started listening to more, there was other songs that I started to enjoy more that I didn't necessarily listen to quite as much when I was younger. So obviously, album starts off with again, I think one of the best songs they've ever written in Sunday Bloody Sunday. You've got New Year's Day, but 40 I think is a super underrated song on this album. I absolutely love it. The Refugee as well, I think is just an absolutely killer song. But this album front to back is incredible. I think it's easily one of their best albums, and definitely for like early era kind of new wave U2, this is I think like the peak of you get a lot of their like raw talent from their early stuff, but you can see them developing into the really mature songwriters they would become. All right, and number 2 on my top 5 albums of 1983 is going to be Power, Corruption, and Lies by New Order. So, also lucky enough to see New Order last year at Darker Waves, and they still sound great. They are super tight. They were like easily the best or one of the best acts of that festival. This album to me is probably like one of the most essential synth pop albums of all time. Again, this like early to mid 80s is the heyday of synth pop in my opinion. It's one of my favorite genres of all time. And I think that this has a pretty strong argument to be made that this is one of, if not the best, like synth pop album of all time. The ironic thing is, I think like the best song, or at least my favorite song, is not actually included on like the studio album, or at least like a lot of different versions of the studio album, which is Blue Monday. There were certain versions that did include that, but not all of them. But even without Blue Monday, it's still such an incredible album. Obviously, it starts off with Age of Consent, which is one of their biggest tracks. But like The Village, 586, Ultraviolence, Ecstasy, like just front to back, this album is absolutely incredible. If you like electronic music, if you like pop music, if you like new wave, and you haven't listened to this album, I don't know what you're doing, because this is just so important for all those genres, especially as they exist now. And it's kind of surprising the number of people that I've met that like don't listen or haven't listened to New Order. But if you're one of those people, go do it, because it's definitely worth it. And this album is absolutely incredible. And my number 1 album of 1983 is Let's Dance, David Bowie. So, spoiler alert, we're talking about albums in the 80s or 70s. There's going to be Bowie on my list. Bowie is a god. He is, in my opinion, one of the most prolific and brilliant songwriters to ever exist. And I will never not take the opportunity to like just gush about him. And this album in particular is one of my all-time favorites. So if you're a big Bowie fan, you know that he's got a lot of eras to his career. His sound changed and evolved all the time. But I love his late 70s, early 80s stuff, where he was, getting a little bit more serious. He was dropping some of the stage theatrics and just writing music. And this album is such a good example of that. Obviously, you've got the title track in Let's Dance. You've got Modern Love, which is just a brilliant song. I think it's one of the best songs ever written. And then I absolutely love the version of Cat People on this album. It's just, again, front to back, such a good album. It's, I know it was kind of panned when it was first released because a lot of people thought he was like going disco or selling out. But like, I think we can all look back on it collectively and understand how brilliant it was. A plus, my favorite album of 1983, and probably one of my favorite albums of the 80s just overall. All right, so that's going to be it for me, guys. Those are my top 5 albums of 1983. Let me know down in the comments what your top 5 albums of 1983 are. And like I said in the beginning, if you could like and subscribe, it helps me out a lot. And as always, I'll talk to you later. Peace.